Hey friends, welcome back. 20 new questions today. This one's all about security service selection, support plan tiers, and cloud architecture foundations. Standard drill. Question. 10-second timer. Answer. Explanation. Pause whenever you need to think. Good luck. Next up, question 1. Compare what is asked to what is offered. Datum Analytics runs a nightly batch job that processes log data for 2 hours starting at midnight. The job currently runs on a fleet of 8 EC2 instances that remain powered on 24 hours a day, sitting completely idle for 22 hours. A solutions architect is tasked with redesigning the workload to align with the AWS well-architected framework sustainability pillars maximize utilization principle. Which approach best satisfies this design principle? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Reserved instances cut costs but never eliminate idle compute. The sustainability pillars maximize utilization design principle states that organizations should avoid provisioning capacity that sits idle, and instead use resources that scale to zero when inactive. AWS Lambda allocates resources only during active execution, and returns them to the shared pool immediately after each invocation completes, eliminating the 22 hours of daily idle consumption entirely. Purchasing reserved instances reduces the monetary cost of the fleet, but does not eliminate idle compute. The instances continue running and consuming energy around the clock regardless of workload activity. EC2 Hibernate preserves instance RAM state during a pause, but the underlying physical capacity reservation may persist depending on configuration, and it does not provide the zero idle guarantee of a serverless architecture. Dedicated hosts assign an entire physical server exclusively to one customer, which is the opposite of maximizing shared hardware utilization. AWS recommends shared tenancy to allow higher aggregate utilization across the hardware fleet, reducing per workload environmental impact. Now, question 2. Spot the narrowing word. Datum Financial Services must comply with regulatory requirements mandating that cryptographic keys reside in dedicated, single-tenant hardware that the company controls exclusively. The regulation specifies that the cloud provider must have no access to the private keys or the physical key storage hardware. Which AWS service satisfies these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. The trigger phrase is single-tenant hardware, zero provider access. AWS CloudHSM provides dedicated, single-tenant hardware security modules deployed within the customer's VPC. The customer has exclusive control over the HSM, generates and stores cryptographic keys entirely within the hardware, and AWS personnel have no access to the keys or the HSM operations. This directly satisfies single-tenant hardware requirements with exclusive customer control. AWS Key Management Service is a managed, multi-tenant service where AWS manages the underlying HSM infrastructure shared across customers. While KMS supports customer-managed keys, the underlying hardware is not single-tenant and AWS is responsible for managing the key storage infrastructure, which does not meet the stated regulatory requirement. AWS Secrets Manager is designed for storing and rotating application credentials and secrets, not for hosting dedicated HSMs or providing single-tenant cryptographic key storage. Amazon S3 server-side encryption with S3 managed keys uses fully AWS-controlled keys where AWS generates and manages the encryption keys with no customer control over the hardware. Now, this is question 3. Fabricom Healthcare is preparing for an annual HIPAA and SOC 2 audit. The compliance team needs to provide external auditors with official AWS documentation proving that the underlying AWS infrastructure components meet HIPAA and SOC 2 requirements. The team needs to download these reports directly from AWS. Which AWS service provides on-demand access to AWS compliance reports and audit documentation? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Artifact is AWS's on-demand compliance report download portal. AWS Artifact is a self-service portal that provides on-demand access to AWS security and compliance documentation, including SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 reports, PCI DSS attestations of compliance, ISO certifications, HIPAA eligibility documentation, and other regulatory audit artifacts. Customers download these documents directly and share them with their own auditors to demonstrate AWS infrastructure compliance. AWS Security Hub provides a centralized view of the customer's own security findings and compliance checks within their AWS environment, but does not provide AWS's own compliance certifications or audit reports. AWS Config tracks configuration history and evaluates whether the customer's AWS resources comply with customer-defined or AWS-managed rules. It assesses the customer's resource configuration, not AWS infrastructure compliance. AWS Trusted Advisor provides automated recommendations for the customer's cost, performance, security posture, and fault tolerance, but does not issue or provide compliance documentation about AWS itself. Let us keep moving. Now for question 4. A large manufacturing company is beginning its AWS cloud journey. The project sponsor asks which AWS Cloud Adoption Framework perspective is responsible for managing organizational structure changes, training employees on new cloud workflows, and ensuring cultural alignment across business units. Which CAF perspective covers these capabilities? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. People perspective owns culture, training, and change management. The people perspective of the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework focuses on the human side of cloud adoption, covering capabilities such as organizational change management, culture evolution, training and skills development, resource management, and leadership alignment. It targets CIO, COO, and CTO stakeholders who must ensure their teams have the right skills and organizational mindset to operate effectively in the cloud. The governance perspective addresses audit and compliance management, risk management, portfolio management, and business process governance. The operations perspective handles IT service delivery, application management, infrastructure management, and incident response. The business perspective focuses on value realization from cloud investments, financial management, portfolio outcomes, and building the business case for migration. Time for another one. Question 5. Read the ask, not just the topic. Conteso Corp is selecting an AWS support plan for its production e-commerce platform. The requirements are a response time under 1 hour for production system down cases, programmatic access to the AWS Support API for automated case management, and access to the full set of AWS Trusted Advisor checks. What is the minimum support plan that satisfies all 3 requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. 3 hard requirements. Find the minimum plan clearing all 3. Business Support Plus is the minimum plan that provides all 3 requirements: an under 1 hour response SLA for production system down cases, programmatic access to the AWS Support API for automated ticket creation and case tracking, and the complete set of AWS Trusted Advisor checks across all 5 check categories. Developer support provides only business hours email support with a 12-hour General Guidance Response (SLA). It does not include support API access and limits trusted advisor access to only 7 core checks. It cannot meet the production system down response time requirement. Enterprise on-ramp and enterprise support both satisfy all 3 requirements, but cost significantly more than Business Support Plus. Since the question asks for the minimum plan that meets all requirements, they are over-specified for this scenario. As of December 2025, developer support and legacy business support plans are no longer available for new subscriptions. Business Support Plus is the current entry-level plan designed for production support requirements, with a planned discontinuation of legacy plans on January 1, 2027. 5. Single-tenant dedicated hardware resolved 2 CloudHSM questions identically. Artifact is the compliance download portal. Business Support Plus is where production SLAs start. Ready. Slow down for question 6. A cloud architect at Woodgrove Bank is explaining the difference between high availability and fault tolerance to the development team. Which statement correctly describes how these 2 concepts differ? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. High availability and fault tolerance are not the same thing. High availability, HA, means minimizing downtime through automatic recovery, redundancy, and failover mechanisms. The system may experience a brief disruption but recovers quickly. Fault tolerance means zero downtime, achieved through fully redundant parallel systems where failures are absorbed without any service interruption. Fault tolerance requires more redundancy and is therefore more expensive than high availability. The distinction between these 2 concepts is not about geographic deployment level. Both HA and fault tolerance can use multiple availability zones or regions depending on design goals. Neither concept is restricted to stateless or stateful applications. Both can apply to either type of workload. This one trips up a lot of people. HA and FT sound similar but they're fundamentally different. Think of high availability like a car with a spare tire. You pull over, swap it, and keep driving. There's a brief stop, but recovery is fast. Fault tolerance is more like an airplane with 4 engines. If one fails at 35,000 feet, the other 3 absorb it and no one in seat 14B even notices. High availability minimizes downtime with quick failover. Think 30 seconds while your database switches to a standby. Fault tolerance means zero downtime. A mirror system is always running in parallel, ready to absorb failures instantly. Fault tolerance costs more. You're paying for that parallel capacity all the time. Option B swaps these definitions to set a trap. The punchline: HA recovers quickly, FT never notices. Ready. Question 7. Do not answer a different question. A government contractor must store cryptographic keys on dedicated, single-tenant hardware, where the cloud provider cannot access the key material or observe cryptographic operations under any circumstances. Which AWS service meets this requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Same dedicated hardware requirement, same answer, same reason. AWS CloudHSM provides dedicated, single-tenant hardware security modules allocated exclusively to each customer. The data plane is end-to-end encrypted and not visible to AWS, meaning AWS cannot access key material or observe cryptographic operations. Customers manage their own HSM credentials entirely outside of IAM, satisfying both the dedicated hardware and zero provider visibility requirements. AWS Key Management Service uses multi-tenant AWS-managed HSM infrastructure. While AWS cannot retrieve plain-text key material, the underlying hardware is shared infrastructure managed by AWS, which fails both the dedicated hardware requirement and the zero provider visibility requirement. AWS Certificate Manager is a managed service for provisioning and renewing SSL/TLS certificates, and does not provide general-purpose cryptographic key storage on dedicated hardware. AWS Secrets Manager is designed for storing and rotating application secrets such as database credentials and API keys. It is not a hardware security module and cannot satisfy requirements for customer-exclusive cryptographic hardware. Let us switch gears. Question 8. Identify the business need first. A compliance team at Relic Cloud needs to investigate two separate issues. First, they must determine exactly which IAM principal deleted a critical DynamoDB table last week. Second, they must confirm whether all EC2 instances in the account had encrypted EBS volumes at the time of the deletion. Which two AWS services should they use to address these requirements? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. Two separate problems. Forensics needs exactly two separate services. AWS CloudTrail records every API call made in an AWS account, capturing the caller identity, timestamp, source IP address, and request parameters. It is the definitive service for answering who performed a specific action, such as deleting a DynamoDB table. AWS Config continuously records the configuration state of AWS resources over time, allowing teams to query what a resource looked like at any point in the past. Config can confirm whether EC2 instances had encrypted EBS volumes at a specific moment in time, satisfying the historical compliance requirement. Amazon CloudWatch collects performance metrics and application logs, but does not record API call history or caller identity, making it unsuitable for forensic investigation of who performed an action. Amazon Guard Duty detects active threats and anomalous behavior, but is not designed for historical API audit forensics. AWS Security Hub aggregates security findings across services, but does not maintain per-resource configuration history for point-in-time compliance queries. Ready. Question 9. Read it carefully. A Datum's network team is configuring a security group for an Amazon EC2 instance running a web server. They add an inbound rule allowing HTTPS traffic on port 443. A junior engineer asks whether an explicit outbound rule is also needed to allow the web server to send responses back to connecting clients. Which characteristic of security groups explains why no explicit outbound return rule is required? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Stateful means return traffic is automatically tracked and permitted. Security groups are stateful firewall components that track the connection state of network flows. When an inbound rule permits HTTPS traffic from a client on port 443, the security group records that connection state and automatically allows the corresponding outbound response packets to reach the client without requiring an explicit outbound rule. This stateful design simplifies configuration because administrators only need to define rules for traffic they intend to allow inbound, and return traffic is permitted transparently. Network access control lists are the stateless alternative in AWS networking. They operate at the subnet level and do not track connection state, meaning administrators must explicitly create both inbound and outbound rules to permit bidirectional traffic flow. Security groups do not apply at the subnet level. They attach directly to elastic network interfaces on EC2 instances and other AWS resources, not to subnets or route tables. Security groups perform connection tracking rather than deep packet inspection, which is a distinct and more computationally intensive inspection method associated with dedicated next-generation firewall appliances rather than cloud security groups. Let us switch gears. Question 10. This is a two-step filter. Conteso Financial's compliance team must provide auditors with evidence that no Amazon S3 bucket in the account has ever had public access enabled. The auditors require both a current snapshot of each bucket's access configuration and a historical record showing all configuration changes over the past 12 months. Which AWS service provides both the current configuration state and a complete historical configuration timeline for S3 buckets? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. CloudTrail tempts, but it only records who called what API. AWS Config is the purpose-built service for resource configuration history and compliance auditing. It continuously records the full configuration state of AWS resources, including S3 bucket public access settings and bucket policies, stores a complete timeline of every configuration change, and can evaluate resources against managed or custom compliance rules to flag violations. The requirement for a current configuration snapshot plus a 12-month historical record of changes is precisely what AWS Config delivers. AWS CloudTrail records API-level events. It captures who called put bucket policy and when, but does not maintain a structured resource configuration timeline or provide a compliance status view across all buckets over time. Amazon CloudWatch monitors operational performance metrics and triggers alarms on threshold breaches. It does not store resource configuration state. Amazon Macy discovers and classifies sensitive data inside S3 objects, which is entirely separate from auditing the access policy configuration of S3 buckets. Halfway, CloudTrail is your API audit trail, Config is your configuration time machine, HA recovers quickly, FT never goes down. The exam loves flipping those two definitions. Keep your focus here. Question 11. Choose for this case, not every case. Fabricom e-commerce processes customer orders through a distributed system. When an order is placed, 4 separate downstream services, inventory management, billing, fulfillment, and email notifications, must each independently process a copy of the same order event. If any one service is temporarily unavailable, its copy of the event must be preserved and delivered when the service recovers. Which two AWS services should be combined to achieve this fan-out architecture with message durability? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option B. Fan-out with per-consumer durability means SNS feeding independent SQS queues. Amazon SNS enables fan-out by publishing a single order event to multiple subscribers simultaneously. The SNS topic acts as a central distribution hub that delivers a copy of each message to every subscribed endpoint at the moment of publication, decoupling the order placement service from all downstream consumers. Amazon SQS provides durable message queuing for each downstream service. Each service subscribes an SQS queue to the SNS topic, receiving its own independent copy of each order event. Messages are retained in the queue until the service successfully processes them, ensuring that a temporary outage does not cause message loss. This SNS to SQS fan-out pattern is the canonical AWS approach for distributing the same event to multiple independent consumers with guaranteed delivery. Amazon Event Bridge is a serverless event bus suited for routing events to different targets based on matching rules. While Event Bridge can also fan out events, the question describes a classic publish-subscribe fan-out with durable per-consumer queues, which the SNS and SQS combination addresses directly as the standard pattern. AWS Step Functions orchestrates sequential or parallel multi-step workflows in a state machine. It coordinates tasks in a defined process flow, but is not designed for distributing the same event to multiple fully independent consumers. Amazon Kinesis Data Streams is built for high-throughput real-time streaming ingestion and replay, such as clickstreams or telemetry pipelines. It introduces more operational complexity than needed for a transactional order fan-out pattern. This one trips people up. Let's map out exactly when to use each messaging service. Imagine a restaurant ticket printer. One order comes in, but the grill cook, fryer, expediter, and cashier all need their own copy. That's exactly the Fabricam problem. SNS, the simple notification service, is your ticket printer. It broadcasts one event to every subscriber at once. But if billing is temporarily down, SNS alone drops that copy. That's where SQS, the simple queue service, saves you. Each service gets its own queue, subscribed to SNS. The queue holds the message until the service recovers. Kinesis handles high-volume streams like clickstreams. Overkill here. Step functions orchestrates multi-step workflows, also not the right tool. The punchline: fan-out with durability equals SNS plus SQS. Alright, let's go to question 12. Quick check. Litware Incorporated is a startup that deployed its first production workload on AWS 6 months ago. The engineering team needs AWS support that includes 24/7 access to cloud support engineers via phone, chat, and web, a response time of less than 30 minutes when business-critical production systems are down, and access to all AWS Trusted Advisor checks. The company does not require a dedicated technical account manager. Which AWS support plan meets all these requirements at the lowest cost? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Business Support Plus. Know the qualifying criteria cold. Business Support Plus is the minimum plan that satisfies all stated requirements. It provides 24/7 phone, web, and chat access to cloud support engineers, a guaranteed human engagement time of less than 30 minutes for business-critical system down cases, access to all AWS Trusted Advisor checks, and real-time AI-powered contextual assistance. A dedicated technical account manager is not included in Business Support Plus, which aligns with the stated requirement to exclude that capability. Basic support covers only account, billing, and service quota questions without access to cloud support engineers or any technical response SLA. Developer support provides email-based access to cloud support during business hours with a next business day SLA for general guidance, which does not satisfy the 24/7 phone requirement or the 30-minute production response time. Enterprise support includes all Business Support Plus features and adds a designated technical account manager and up to 15-minute response times for production-critical cases, exceeding the stated requirements at a significantly higher minimum monthly cost. Alright, let's get into question 13. Quick check. Margie's Travel is launching a production reservation system on AWS that processes bookings around the clock. The engineering team requires 24/7 phone, web, and chat access to cloud support engineers, and needs a guaranteed human response within 30 minutes when production systems fail. The company wants the minimum cost support plan that meets these requirements, and does not need a dedicated technical account manager. Which AWS support plan should Margie's Travel subscribe to? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Pattern repeat. Same answer, same reasoning. Business Support Plus is the minimum plan that satisfies every stated requirement. It provides 24/7 phone, web, and chat access to cloud support engineers, a guaranteed human engagement time of less than 30 minutes for business-critical system down cases, access to more than 500 AWS Trusted Advisor checks, and real-time AI-powered contextual assistance. A dedicated technical account manager is not included in Business Support Plus, which aligns with the stated requirement to exclude that capability while keeping costs lower than enterprise tiers. Basic support covers only account, billing, and service quota questions and does not provide access to cloud support engineers or any technical support response time guarantee. Enterprise on-ramp support and enterprise support both include dedicated technical account manager functions and carry significantly higher monthly costs than Business Support Plus, exceeding the stated requirements and budget constraints. OK. Question 14. Close is not correct. Fabricumcor's website recently experienced two distinct attacks, a volumetric UDP flood that overwhelmed their network bandwidth, and a wave of SQL injection requests that were targeting their application login form. The security team wants to understand which AWS service is designed to defend against each attack type. Which statement correctly matches the AWS service to the threat it is designed to mitigate? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Shield advanced fee credits do not equal automatic SQL injection blocking. AWS Shield is purpose-built for distributed denial of service protection at the network and transport layers. Shield standard automatically protects all AWS customers at no charge from common volumetric attacks including UDP floods, SYN floods, and DNS amplification attacks. Shield Advanced provides enhanced protections, 24/7 DDoS response team access, real-time attack visibility, and financial protections against scaling costs incurred during attacks. AWS WAF is a web application firewall that operates at the application layer and is specifically designed to filter malicious HTTP and HTTPS traffic patterns, including SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and other Layer 7 exploits based on configurable rule sets. AWS WAF does not protect against volumetric network layer DDoS attacks. AWS Shield does not inspect application layer HTTP payloads for injection patterns. Although Shield Advanced includes AWS WAF fee credits for protected resources, it does not include pre-configured rules that automatically detect or block SQL injection. Customers must define and maintain their own WAF rule sets. Let's slow down here. This one hides its trap inside a single word. Imagine two burglars. One tries to knock your door down with a battering ram. That's the UDP flood. The other slips a fake note through your mail slot. That's SQL injection. AWS gives you two different tools. Shield blocks the battering ram. It defends against volumetric network layer attacks. WAF, the web application firewall, is your mail slot inspector. It reads every HTTP request and rejects things like SQL injection. The word correctly is doing heavy lifting here. Answer. A sounds tempting. Shield Advanced gives you WAF credits, but that doesn't mean Shield itself blocks SQL injection. You still configure your own rules. Punchline. Shield handles the flood, WAF handles the payload. Here we go. Question 15. Watch the tempting shortcut. A Datum Corporation's cloud security team is establishing IAM best practices for a newly created AWS account. The team needs to identify which tasks require root user credentials and cannot be delegated to IAM users or roles under any circumstances. Which two actions require the AWS account root user? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. Root-only tasks are a short fixed list. Know it cold. Changing the AWS account name or email address and permanently closing an AWS account are tasks that can only be performed by the root user. AWS does not allow these account-level administrative actions to be delegated through IAM policies or roles. Other root-only tasks include changing the AWS support plan, enabling MFA delete on S3 buckets, signing up for GovCloud, and restoring IAM administrator permissions if all admin access is lost. Creating IAM users, attaching permission policies, creating S3 buckets, and enabling MFA for IAM users are all operations that can be delegated to IAM users or roles with appropriate permissions and do not require root credentials. The security best practice is to use root only for these specific tasks and to protect root credentials with MFA. 15 down. Shield absorbs network layer floods. WAF blocks layer 7 injection. Root user owns account email and closure only. Business support plus appeared 3 times this batch. Okay, let's check question 16. A multinational manufacturing company is deploying AWS across multiple business units. Their cloud program team needs to establish controls for tracking cloud spending against approved budgets, managing risk associated with migrating regulated workloads, and ensuring consistent audit trails across all AWS accounts. Which AWS CAF perspective provides the foundational capabilities that directly address these program governance requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Governance covers budgets, risk management, and cross-account audit trails. The governance perspective of the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework provides the capabilities that align cloud programs with organizational control and oversight requirements. Its foundational capabilities include cloud financial management to track and control cloud spending against approved budgets, risk management to identify and mitigate risks associated with regulated workloads, audit and compliance to ensure regulatory and policy adherence, and application portfolio management to provide visibility into assets across multiple accounts and business units. The security perspective focuses on identity and access management, vulnerability management, threat detection, and incident response. It addresses the technical controls that protect workloads, not program-level governance of cloud investments and audit trails. The operations perspective covers IT service management, event management, change management, availability, and performance management. It governs how cloud services are operated after deployment, not how the program itself is controlled, audited, and funded. The business perspective focuses on developing business cases for cloud adoption, aligning cloud investments to business strategy, and managing benefits realization. It drives the why and the expected outcomes of transformation, rather than the oversight and control mechanisms required for regulated, multi-unit deployments. Next up, question 17. Classic exam trap. Litware's platform team is containerizing a data enrichment microservice that processes records queued in Amazon SQS. Each processing job runs between 20 and 40 minutes. The team requires a solution where AWS manages all underlying container host infrastructure, including patching and scaling, without the team needing to manage EC2 instances or a Kubernetes control plane. Which compute option best meets these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Lambda caps at 15 minutes. This job runs 20 to 40. Amazon ECS with the AWS Fargate launch type provides fully managed, serverless container orchestration, where AWS provisions, patches, and scales all underlying compute infrastructure. Customers define tasks and services. Fargate handles everything below the container boundary. Fargate supports long-running container tasks with no cap on execution duration, making it appropriate for jobs lasting 20 to 40 minutes. AWS Lambda supports container images but imposes a maximum execution timeout of 15 minutes per invocation. Jobs that routinely run 20 to 40 minutes would consistently exceed this limit and fail to complete, making Lambda unsuitable for this workload. Amazon EC2 with Docker requires the team to manage instance provisioning, operating system patching, Docker daemon maintenance, and auto-scaling configuration, all directly contradicting the requirement to avoid managing host infrastructure. Amazon EKS with managed node groups reduces some Kubernetes node management overhead, but still requires the team to manage Kubernetes control plane configuration, API server interactions, namespace setup, and upgrade lifecycle, adding significant operational complexity compared to simply running containerized tasks on Fargate. Let's pause here. The Lambda timeout is a classic trap, and this question is built around it. Picture this. Every single job your service runs is at least 20 minutes long. Lambda's hard limit is 15 minutes per invocation. That means every job times out before it finishes. Not some jobs. Every one. The shortest job needs 20 minutes. Lambda stops at 15. That gap is the trap. Fargate has no per-task timeout. A job can run 20, 40, or even 90 minutes and finish cleanly. EC2 has no timeout, but you're patching servers yourself. The question asks for zero infrastructure management, no EC2 to patch, no Kubernetes control plane to babysit. That points straight to Fargate. Lambda's 15-minute wall kills this workload dead. Next up, question 18. Start with what the user needs. Litware Gaming is building a player profile service for a massively multiplayer online game. The service stores each player's account details, in-game achievements, and preferences. The database must handle traffic that fluctuates unpredictably from 500 to 5 million concurrent players, deliver single-digit millisecond read latency at all scales, and accommodate frequent schema changes as new game features ship without requiring table migrations. Which database service best meets all these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Aurora scales reads but not writes dynamically. DynamoDB scales both. Amazon DynamoDB with on-demand capacity mode addresses all three requirements simultaneously. DynamoDB is a fully managed NoSQL database that consistently delivers single-digit millisecond performance at any scale, from hundreds to hundreds of millions of requests per second, without requiring capacity planning. On-demand mode automatically adjusts throughput to match traffic spikes and subsides, eliminating the risk of throttling during sudden player surges. As a schemaless document and key value store, DynamoDB accommodates evolving data models without requiring alter-table migrations, which is essential when game features ship frequently. Amazon Redshift is a columnar analytics data warehouse optimized for complex SQL aggregations over large historical datasets, not for transactional millisecond latency lookups at gaming scale. Amazon RDS for MySQL is a relational database that enforces rigid schemas and requires upfront capacity provisioning. It does not automatically scale write throughput to absorb sudden million-fold traffic spikes without extensive manual intervention. Amazon Aurora significantly improves on RDS with better read scaling via read replicas, but it is still a relational system requiring defined schemas and does not scale write throughput as dynamically as DynamoDB on-demand mode for highly variable workloads. Now, question 19. Separate context from noise. A cloud security architect at Northwind Traders is evaluating AWS threat detection services. The team needs one service that continuously analyzes CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs, and DNS query logs to identify account compromises and unusual API call patterns, and a second service that continuously scans EC2 instances and container images for known software vulnerabilities and unintended network exposure. Which two AWS services address these specific requirements? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. Guard duty detects behavior. Inspector scans for known CVE vulnerabilities. AWS Guard Duty is a continuous threat detection service that ingests and analyzes CloudTrail management events, CloudTrail S3 data events, VPC flow logs, DNS query logs, Kubernetes audit logs, and other data sources. Guard Duty uses machine learning, anomaly detection, and integrated threat intelligence to identify threats such as credential compromise, reconnaissance, unauthorized access, and cryptomining. It detects behavioral anomalies but does not scan software for vulnerabilities. AWS Inspector is an automated vulnerability management service that continuously scans EC2 instances and Amazon ECR container images against the common vulnerabilities and exposures, CVE, database, and also assesses unintended network reachability. AWS Security Hub is a central aggregation layer that collects findings from Guard Duty, Inspector, Macie, and other services and maps them to compliance frameworks. It does not perform its own active detection or scanning. Amazon Macie uses machine learning to discover and protect sensitive data stored in Amazon S3 and is not focused on threat detection or vulnerability scanning. AWS Detective uses graph analytics to help security teams investigate and understand the root cause of findings. It is a forensic investigation tool used after a finding is identified, not a proactive detection or scanning service. Let's slow down here. 5 security services, but only 2 of them actively find threats. Imagine your AWS account is a building. Guard Duty is the security camera watching every door. It reads CloudTrail logs, VPC flow data, and DNS queries. If an API call fires from an unusual country at 3 a.m., Guard Duty catches it. Inspector is the building inspector checking each room for broken locks. It scans EC2 instances and container images for known software flaws and open ports. Security Hub just collects findings, it doesn't detect anything itself. Macie hunts for sensitive data in S3. Detective helps you investigate a threat after it's already been found. None of those 3 actively detect or scan. This question wants 2 active services, 1 watching behavior, 1 checking software. That's Guard Duty plus Inspector. Next up, let's get into question 20. Northwind Corp migrates a batch processing workload from self-managed Amazon EC2 instances to AWS Lambda functions. Which security responsibility transfers to AWS as a direct result of this migration? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Moving to Lambda hands OS and runtime patching entirely to AWS. AWS Lambda is a fully managed serverless compute service. When customers move from EC2 to Lambda, AWS assumes responsibility for patching the underlying host operating system, maintaining and updating the execution environment runtime, and managing the physical and virtualized compute infrastructure. This is a concrete example of the shared responsibility model shifting customer burden as the service abstraction level increases, from IaaS toward a managed service model. Defining IAM execution roles and permission policies remains entirely the customer's responsibility regardless of which compute service is used. Classifying and encrypting the data processed by the application is always the customer's responsibility under the shared responsibility model. Regardless of service type, customers always own their data. Configuring VPC network settings for Lambda functions that need to access private resources is also a customer responsibility when Lambda is deployed within a VPC. 3 takeaways from this session. First, CloudHSM means dedicated single-tenant hardware with zero AWS access to key material. KMS does not deliver that. Second, Business Support Plus is the minimum tier for 24/7 phone support and a sub-30-minute production system down SLA. Third, CloudTrail records who called which API. Config records what every resource looked like at any point in time. Every question today had a keyword fingerprint. Single-tenant locks to CloudHSM, 30-minute SLA without a TAM locks to Business Support Plus, zero downtime locks to fault tolerance. Build those mental triggers now and the real exam becomes pattern recognition.